Inside Huntsville with Brenda Martin, a conversation with department heads at City Hall on streets, ball fields, public safety, and more. And also with our community partners that add economic security, support education, and enhance the city's quality of life.
Hello, I'm Brenda Martin with Inside Huntsville, and thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited about today's program as we'll be talking about Huntsville natives, past and present. When one thinks about famous people from Huntsville, Werner von Braun and portrait artist Maria Howard Wheaton, professional football Hall of Famer John Stallworth, or founder and CEO of Hudson Alpha, Jim Hudson, come to mind. But there have been many Huntsvillians that have made significant contributions to not only this community, but nationally. My guest today, Leslie Thomas, born and raised in Huntsville, has embarked on a lofty project of authoring a book about Huntsvillians called Legendary Locals, Huntsville. Welcome, Leslie, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
This is so exciting. Well, tell us a little bit about Leslie.
Well, I am originally from Huntsville, as you said, and so I grew up here and went on field trips and learned about all sorts of legendary locals, Howard Wheaton you mentioned, for example. And then I went to college in upstate New York at Vassar and thought I would never ever come back to Huntsville. Lived in New York City for a while where I taught creative writing and English literature, moved to San Francisco and did the same thing there, and eventually ended up back in Huntsville. So that was about 10 years ago, and since then I have been involved in a number of things in our community, including the Speak Up Community Engagement Initiative of the Schools Foundation, the Educational Impact Team of United Way, and master gardening programs, those sorts of things. I've been sort of involved here and there. And then I had this opportunity to write this book. So I got to take all the information that I had learned growing up and being back here and kind of put it together in a very small snapshot of what goes on here.
How special.
Yeah.
Now, what led you to write this book?
Well, there was a call for submissions of proposals, actually. So I thought, well, I grew up here. I know a little bit about this place. And so I sent a proposal to Arcadia Publishing, and they accepted it. And then that was November of 2013. And then I was on my way and I started collecting information. And so it's been about 2 years in the works for this book.
So it took you about 2 years to
yes.
finish this.
Yes, yeah, it's a pretty big project. They don't give you any stipulations about the number of characters to include, but as you can imagine, 101 is not even close to the number of people who've made an impact in this town. So
the process of writing this book, my goodness, no doubt was long and perhaps consuming at times, was it not?
It was
oh my goodness.
consuming, to say the least. Yes, in fact, our kitchen table still has stuff all over it. It is consuming, but there's so much to be learned about these people, and you start with one person and they lead you to someone else who leads you to someone else, and when you start to tell people about what you're working on, they have ideas about who should be included.
Okay.
So it expands and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's really important to try to rein it in because you can just never stop.
Was there a part of the process that was most important to you or one of your favorite?
My favorite part of the process was talking with people. I endeavored from the very beginning to speak with the locals that I had chosen who are still living, because I feel like if you really want to capture the story that someone has, you need to speak with them. You need to see how they talk with you and what sort of body language they have and what they're excited about. And the difficult part is that I only had so many words in which to capture these biographies. So 200 words for an interview that's an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours long is really hard to consolidate. So that was, meeting the people was the best part. Keeping their stories short was the most difficult part. This book is part of a series. Arcadia is a history press, and they do all sorts of books like this. So there are parameters, such as you can only have 200 words for a picture that's this big, but 400 words for a picture that's this big, and you have to have at least 180 photographs, and you have to have at least 128 pages. So there's a lot of math involved in it. That's why we have editors to help us out. But so trying to fit everyone into those molds and trying to stop myself from going further was the biggest challenge.
Because I'm sure there was such great information about everyone. First of all, we need to indicate how many people are in the book.
Well, there are 101 characters.
Okay.
Not necessarily people. Miss Baker is in it, for example. The monkey
let's
who went
talk
to
about your
space.
characters.
Miss Baker is there. Lily Flagg is there. She, of course, is a cow.
Yes.
The ghost of Sally Carter is in there. So, and the mural that's on the First Baptist Church on the corner of Governor's Drive,
Yes.
that's in there. So those are things that I found to be significant about Huntsville, and so I included them. So not all of them are people, but there are 101 characters in the book.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you talked about the mural at Governor's Drive. What did you find out about that?
Well, there are all sorts of constellations in it, which if you're flying down Governor's Drive, you don't necessarily notice that. But if you get up close and you look, you see that there are 7 different constellations in the mural. And those represent the 7 churches which are spoken about at the end of Revelation, I believe it is. So there's a bunch of messages in there and motifs that you wouldn't notice if you're just driving by.
Right.
And the mural is fairly old, so it's sort of, it's kind of not in the best shape right now. So you would have to really take a closer look to see. But you have to read the book and see all the details about it, for sure.
Now, with this being such a undertaking, if someone else was interested in doing this, what kind of advice would you give them?
Stay organized. Keep really good notes. Keep index cards that you can put in alphabetical order. That's what I did. Microsoft Excel was my best friend throughout this whole thing. Just stay organized, and then really be open to who you want to include, because people will give you suggestions of people that you've maybe not heard of before, who've made a huge impact in our community. And that was really the fun part about it, was, Von Braun obviously made a huge difference in our community.
Yes.
And everyone knows that, and that's great, and he's in there. But there are other people that you may not have heard of who also made a huge quieter impact, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in doing your research, was the internet helpful at all?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I know you went to the library.
I did. I went to the library many, many times, and they were very helpful at the library. But the internet, of course, is very helpful because you can find things like obituaries online, which are very helpful when you're trying to figure out what someone did and where they lived and where they came from. Also, HuntsvilleHistoryCollection.org is a wonderful database that the Daytons have put together, and they have scanned the Huntsville Historical Review and the Historic Huntsville Quarterly in there. So those are documents that have all sorts of information about historical figures. And because they're scanned in there, it's a lot easier just to look up something like that and find it than to go through volumes and volumes of magazines, which is also a wonderful thing to do. But that was hugely helpful. And then obviously email, to correspond with people via email was a great tool for me, instead of being on the phone trying to get in touch with people, because then you have a record of what it is you're talking about and everybody knows where you are, and you can send a list of questions and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I would like to know from you. And that really helps when you're trying to get someone's story and you've never met them before. You say, this is who I am, and I want to write a book, and it includes you, and I think you're legendary, and here's why. They're probably like, well, who are you? What do I? So that really helps. That really helps to help them get some information.
Well, okay, so we've got 101 individuals. How did you determine who to feature in your book?
Well, as I said, I did grow up here, so I immediately thought of people like Howard Whedon.
Yes.
Because I went to her home, or Harvey Jones, because I knew who he was as an architect. But what I did was I asked people what they thought. I said, if you were to go into a bookstore and look at a book about Huntsville and look in the index for the people who are legendary, whose name would you look up? Because that's what I would do. And so people came up with all sorts of names that I had heard of and had not heard of some. And I actually also put it on my personal Facebook page, because there are people I know who are not from here who have heard of people from Huntsville, and they made that association. So that was my niche, to get that list. Ironically, not all the names in the book are actually included in the index, because as I said before, it's a formula book, with 128 pages and a certain number of pictures and a certain number of words per picture. So there wasn't space to include all of the people in the book in the index. All the locals are in there, But Kabalevsky is in there, and Alice B. Toklas is in there, Gertrude Stein is in there, Charles Schultz is in there. Those people aren't from here, but they do have a connection to Huntsville. So
what do you
just
mean
have
by
to.
That? What do you mean by that?
Well, they are.
What kind of connection?
They are mentioned. Maurice Grosser, for example, who is in the book, used to spend time with Alice B. Toklas and Gertrude Stein in New York City. So he's from here, but he spent time with those two authors who are internationally known. But they have a connection in a way to Huntsville in that way.
Okay.
So, but you won't know it unless you read the book,
Unless
because
you
it's not in the index because there wasn't room. So.
Okay. Now, after all the research you did, no doubt you became attached to certain ones.
Sure.
Can you share your favorite legend, if you will?
Sure. That actually is a question that I asked all of the people I interviewed, and I was afraid someone would eventually ask me. So thank you for asking. My favorite, I believe, was probably Dulcinea DeBerry, who helped to bring about the first African-American branch library in Huntsville. She started off in the basement of a church with 10 magazines and 66 books and 3 potted plants. And she made it into, over the course of 3 years, she made it into an operation that had 4,000 books and 66 magazines in circulation. She started a summer reading program. She had a Friday afternoon reading program. So she started with basically nothing. And then she believed so strongly in the importance of literacy and literature and libraries that she just kept going, and she just made this huge thing out of it. So she eventually moved to North Carolina in her 70s, but she worked tirelessly in that effort. And hers was it was a gem of a story, I thought, to learn, because I had no idea who she was. I was going through pictures in the library archives, and I found this picture that was fantastic, and I said, who is this and what did she do? So that was another way that I found people as well, just to flip through photographs and say, this person is doing something that looks interesting. Who is it and what did they do?
That's interesting, because all the times that I've spent in the library and talked with the librarians, I've never heard that story before.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
We'll have to make sure that is definitely out there.
Right.
Yes. Now, you'll be having a book signing real soon.
Indeed.
Tell us about that.
Sure. It's on Monday, November the 16th at Harrison Brothers Hardware downtown from 5 until 8. And that's the day of the publication of the book. So until then, the book is not available. I haven't even seen the book yet.
You don't even have a copy of the book.
I have my manuscript, but I don't have the book. They assure me that I'll get it before the actual publication date, but that's a Sunday, the day before, so we'll see. But yes, Monday, November the 16th from 5 until 8 at Harrison Brothers. And I would love for everyone who can to please come and check out the book, and check out Harrison Brothers, because it's a great store, and one of the Harrisons is actually in the book. So.
And I was going to say, now, what made you decide to have your book signing at Harrison Brothers?
Well, they very graciously offered to have me there.
Okay, wonderful.
And it's just been a favorite store of mine for a long time, and they have all sorts of local books, which I think is a really important endeavor to support. So I went in and I said, here's what I'm doing, and they were interested and have been very gracious in offering to host me.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, did you ever think that you would be an author?
No.
Okay.
15 years ago, I was living in San Francisco teaching English literature at a Waldorf school. So I was reading other people's books. Not that this is anything close to the books that I was teaching.
How special this is.
Yeah, it really is. And I didn't have any intention really of writing a book until, as I said, there was a call for submissions of proposals. And I thought, well, I know a little bit about this, and I didn't know how little I knew until I started doing research.
Amazing.
But, yeah.
Amazing. Well, tell us your reason. What was your reason for writing the book? I mean, I know you talked about you were from here, but is there anything else a little deeper?
Well, I think that when you live here, as with any place, you tend to take things for granted. So we drive by the Rocket on 565 all the time. Okay, so if you grew up here, you know that you went on a field trip to the Space and Rocket Center. You've heard of Miss Baker, but do you really know what they did? If you go to Burritt Museum and you stand on the mountain and you look at this beautiful view of the city below, do you really have any idea what that was about? Why that amount of land was preserved? What Dr. Burritt was thinking when he donated his property to the city of Huntsville and said, make this a museum and let people know about it. When you hear about Hudson Alpha, do you really have any idea what they're doing out there? So one of the factors in figuring out who to include was what goes on in this town, what goes on at Merrimack Mill, what goes on at Low Mill, who's behind that, who did that. So those were the sorts of things that I wanted to bring to people's minds. When you're walking through Big Spring Park, stop for a minute and stand there and think, what was John Hunt thinking when he got here? And none of this other stuff was here. The fountain wasn't there. You know, the Japanese bridge wasn't there.
That's right.
So what was he thinking? What did he envision? Because it's really interesting to see how it started with something so small and then became what it is now. Huntsville is a great place, and there are some great people in it, and there have been people who have worked to make it that way. So that is something that I really wanted to share with people, is why things are the way they are. Don't just take it for granted that we're, you know, number one in the state or the world or whatever it is all the time.
Because we're the first in many things.
We are, and there's a reason. So hopefully this book will help to identify just a few of the people who made that a possibility.
I'm excited for you that you took on this great challenge, I'm sure, you know, and of course we Huntsvillians will be the beneficiary of it. We're so excited about having you do your book, your book review and your book signing, that is. One other thing I wanted to ask you, when you interviewed individuals, how special was that? What did you take away from those?
Oh my goodness.
And I know, you know, you interviewed, 100 plus people, but
right.
Was there something special about those interviews?
For someone to sit down with you and to tell you their story and to trust you with their story and say, here it is, especially when they don't necessarily know you from anyone.
Okay.
That is huge. It's a real honor and it's a real responsibility. And I hope that I've represented everyone accurately and well, and most of all, respectfully. But people invited me into their homes. People met me at a coffee shop. I didn't
so they were excited.
They were super excited,
Okay,
and they were
great.
interested too. And I can't tell you how many times people would say to me, "Thank you so much for doing this.
Yes.
And thank you for including me." People were really honored to be included.
Yeah.
And so that was really special.
I bet.
For sure. Yeah.
Any special or one that you I shouldn't ask that because I'm sure they were all special. So
they all were special.
They were all special.
We'll talk about that. They all were special, for sure.
Yeah.
People are just very genuinely interested and gracious and very giving. And that's a real treat.
With their time and with their information and
I spoke with relatives too of people as well. So that's a lot to sit down and say, here's what this person did in my life, and that's huge. It's a real trust.
Sure.
So yeah,
which I'm sure you don't take lightly.
I don't, not at all. Yeah. Not at all.
Well, we're so happy happy for you, first of all.
Thank you so much.
And happy that you have decided to do this. That's our show for today. I'm Brenda Martin for Inside Huntsville. Enjoy your day.